The Illinois General Assembly is racing toward its scheduled May 31st adjournment date. I'm Jack Titchener. This is Illinois Lawmakers. I'm joined by Rich Miller, who follows all of this activity here at the State House for CapitalFacts.com. Rich, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's been quite a spring session for Governor J.B. Pritzker. He's gotten a lot of the big asks he's wanted for, like the graduated income tax that cleared the House earlier this week, and a lot of other bills.
Yeah, $15 minimum wage. Excuse me, the Reproductive Health Act that cleared the House and then is likely to be passed in the Senate shortly after we speak here. Plus a lot of bills that, while he wasn't the main driver behind them, he supported them, and they're sending it to him. And
it looks as though, of course, the cannabis bill passed the Senate earlier this week.
Overwhelmingly.
The House is going to take it up here, and that's a little bit of a heavier lift in the House, but some of the votes seem to be coming together.
I mean, I don't like to bet on outcomes of votes, but if I did, I think I'd bet that would pass.
In this situation, there's a tendency to wonder if on some of these bills the Democrats might have overreached a little bit, or is it just the simple fact that they have supermajorities here overall?
Well, when you have supermajorities like they do in the Senate and the House and control the governor's mansion, you have to be a little mindful of the fact that you have all this power to maybe not try to use it all. Some would say abuse it. But that's difficult to do. There's no real check on the system here. The Republicans really don't have enough votes to stop them from doing just about anything. It's more of a self-control issue, and politicians aren't really big on self-control issues. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the Republicans had complete control, and they weren't exactly, bipartisan. In Springfield, Mike Madigan sat in his office for 2 years.
Some of those rules that were developed under the Republican rule are the same ones Madigan uses now.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Uses them to some effect. As you look at this, session, how involved has the governor and the governor's staff been in some of these key issues that have been moving through here?
On the key issues, very involved. They've been negotiating and holding meetings for several weeks on these big issues. Some people have complained that they didn't get involved early enough, but so far they've been able to pass everything, so we'll see. We're down at crunch time now, and there's still a few things out there.
Well, one of the big things out there right now is trying to get a capital bill across the finish line, and that's been a bit tougher needle to thread because there's all these moving parts. You've got the whole situation with gaming and
that's
sports
a real
betting.
Problem.
Yeah.
When you combine the capital bill with something else, that makes it more difficult to pass. It's already kind of difficult because that means a tax increase, because you have to fund these road, bridge projects, vertical projects, buildings, et cetera. Somehow you can't we're not the federal government. You can't just borrow the money and, without putting any down payment down. So it requires money, and that's always a problem. Then you add something like gaming that hasn't been able to pass in a long time.
Right.
Senator Terry Link up in Lake County has been trying to get a casino in his county for 100 years, right? So
at least 10.
Not quite that long, but it seems like 100.
Yeah.
These are never easy things to do, and it got locked in with that capital bill, and it's making it more difficult.
Well, it's interesting. I have been talking to people on both sides of the aisle here in the last day or so, and I am hearing from the Republicans that they are getting heard when it comes to actually crafting the fiscal year 2020 budget.
Yeah, heard. I don't think they're partners, but they are being heard. I think the Democrats are putting some things into the budget that are being requested, and into the gaming bill that the capital bill and the gaming bill, frankly, that are being requested. I don't think they're full negotiating partners.
They did get some points in on the cannabis legalization bill,
yes,
having to do with homegrown, and that's out the window for now, except for people who have recreational. It's not recreational, but medical permits for them.
Right. I think a lot of those changes had more to do with the Democrats, some of the Democrats in the House, than the Republicans in the Senate. Plus, I guess I'm pretty sure, though, they wanted a bipartisan bill just to say, hey, we did this and we didn't just ram it through.
Rich Miller, thanks always for your expertise here, watching the State House and all the activities. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me, Jack.
Absolutely.
See you in the fall.
Here with a view from their respective House leadership teams are Assistant House Democratic Majority Leader Will Davis of East Hazel Crest and Assistant House Republican Leader Grant Wehrli of Naperville. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program again.
Pleasure to be here.
Lots been going on here at the Capitol this week as we head toward adjournment. As you count down to adjournment, let's take a look at where things stand. Recreational marijuana moved out of the Senate on a bipartisan basis this week, 38-17. What will that bill face here in the House of Representatives? Still getting votes together on that?
I think so. I mean, members are still trying to process what came out of the Senate, everything that's in the bill. From a Black Caucus perspective, we're extremely proud of the way we're addressing social inequities, resources that go back into economically depressed communities, opportunities for minority businesses as such, as well as the expungement pieces of it.
How are House Republicans viewing the legislation? There were some compromises that went into the Senate bill that were Republican ideas. How will this work out over here?
There has been progress made on this bill in a bipartisan manner. I do believe you will see some Republican votes on this. However, the majority of my caucus still has concerns with the legalization of recreational marijuana. Anything from, it's still a federal Schedule 1 down to some of the just social impact issues. So that analysis is still being undertaken as we speak. So we'll see it on the floor shortly, and I'd be surprised if you don't see a few Republican votes on it.
As it stands, as we understand it, the measure would allow adults 21 years of age and older to possess up to 30 grams of cannabis. It creates a statewide dispensary system for sales and provides for pardoning people convicted of possessing small amounts of pot. It becomes effective January 1 of 2020. Let's talk about some of those ideas that were kind of holding things up originally. There was an idea of having individuals have up to 5 plants homegrown. That's been changed. It now is only for those folks who are registered as using medical marijuana in the state?
Correct. The homegrown component was a non-starter for the majority of the Illinois House Republicans. That being removed was a big step in moving this to a better piece of legislation. And for, in the spirit of bipartisanship, we do appreciate our thoughts and concerns being addressed. That issue.
I think as we work to accept where we are right now, I don't see homegrown going anywhere permanently. I think it's just one of those things that will come as we progress forward and understanding what this new industry is for us, what it means, and how we'll be able to manage it.
Maybe sometime down the line, but not in this. Not to get this first crack at it across the finish line. So
Absolutely.
Expungement on pot convictions. That was another thing that folks wanted to see in that from the Black Caucus perspective. And what's the agreement we've worked out thus far?
Well, I think the premise is that we're about to legalize an industry that has put people in jail. So we had figured out we had to walk some of that back. So to the extent in which those who are incarcerated now because of having some possession up to where we are, that's where we see the need to try to give those individuals an opportunity, not only just to free themselves out of the correction system, but also maybe even an opportunity to participate in this process as well.
Exactly. And one of the things that was originally in it, this was going to be kind of a legislative, if you will, pardoning or expungement, but there were constitutional questions about that. And that was something that Senator Jason Barrickman, from one of the Senate Republicans caucus, latched onto that and said, well, if the governor can grant pardons and clemency, maybe that's the constitutional way to go.
Right. So when it comes to that, I have not seen the details of the bill as it currently stands. We just saw this last night, but that was our concern as well, that this is a separation of powers issue and who can grant pardons and who cannot. I look forward to reading that analysis on that, but it sounds like it may be addressed, but I'm not 100% certain.
Employers could still have a zero tolerance, zero policy.
Absolutely, and they should.
And there's federal law that, whether you're a trucker or an airline pilot or things like that, that still trump what's going on here at the state level, irrespective of this still being a Schedule 1 federal.
And as a commercial pilot, you know something about.
Correct.
It's not a deal like 8 hours between bottle and throttle.
And that's one of the concerns that we had, just generally speaking, is how to detect if someone is under the influence. It stays in your system longer. You may not be under the influence, but the chemical traces are still there. So there's some field sobriety testing concerns that we have as well.
But it's appropriate that employers should have that level of say in those folks who are working for them as well.
Exactly, because federal grants in a lot of cases with universities are contingent upon drug-free workplaces and the like. The other thing that I was going to ask about, there's components of this built in so that minority communities that have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs earlier because of the disproportionate number of minorities that have been charged with marijuana offenses and the like. There's provisions in here so that there would be grants to get minority businesses started, to get a bite of the apple, so to speak.
Right. I think that's one of the things that we are most proud of, particularly as a member of the Black Caucus, because, again, this is a very new industry here in Illinois, and we're creating rules from the ground, and we're going way past where other states currently are who have already legalized marijuana. So we're extremely proud of the help that this is going to give, particularly in disproportionate communities, minority communities, to give them an opportunity to gain from something that has taken away from them for years.
I want to move on to the subject of a capital bill. The governor, of course, has his plans for a $41 billion plus 6-year program. That's out there. It's being debated. There are funding streams coming together for that. Where do things stand? We're about 24 hours away from adjournment. Is this thing about to cook?
Right now, I would say it's in flux, both the revenue for vertical and horizontal capital. Those negotiations and discussions are going on as we speak. I do see a path to it coming together in the next 24 hours, but there's a lot of hard work yet to be done.
In terms of the revenue sources, we've talked about gasoline taxes to go for the horizontal, the highway section of that. What about the vertical components of that as far as trying to build new buildings, hospitals, and the like?
Well, I believe there's still some gaming considerations that will go into the to the vertical side of it. I'm of the opinion that, on a capital bill situation, we have to look everywhere we can for some money. And once we have an assessment of every possible place, then we can balance out what we take from here, what we don't take from here, but something that everybody supports, and we want to move that forward. One
of the big obstacles that we're facing now is members of the Republican caucus would like to see this line item by line item in a piece of legislation. In the past, we've done memos of understanding and lump sums. That's something we're a little bit cautious of right now, and we are working to get that line by line in a piece of legislation.
In terms of the capital in relation to gaming, casinos, and the like, sports betting, there's been a lot of work done on that in the last year or so to try to get that to the point where we can tee off on that. And now, of course, the casino issue comes into play because the city of Chicago wants a casino, and in exchange for support for that, they want to, for sports betting, they want a casino, then everyone else wants a casino.
South suburbs included. We've been advocating for a license for the South suburbs in a geographic region for many, many years. So we see this as an opportunity to move that forward, not only for revenue purposes for some of our communities. There are potential for help for a trauma center that could come out of this in some respects, as well as help for underserved communities who have trouble coming with match money to deal with road projects as well. So a lot of good things that could help us if we were to get a license in the South suburbs.
And specifically for Chicago, the revenue from a Chicago casino would go to help fund their pension systems. So, I mean, when you think of people visiting Chicago from out of state to help solve what truly is a crisis in the city of Chicago and around the state of Illinois, that is one of the things that I find to be favorable about a casino in Chicago.
I have to ask about the budget in the time we have remaining, a couple minutes left. My word last week was that the working groups have basically done their work in terms of a bipartisan approach to crafting next year's budget. Do you have a ballpark figure that we may be looking at?
In terms of overall?
Overall for next year's budget, I think we're about 38.5 for this year.
I think it may be next year. I mean, they generally increase, and I think we anticipate increase. If nothing else, the cost of providing services, the cost of doing business increases, and I think our budget should in some way reflect those kinds of increases as well.
Republicans, though, were a little on the skeptical side about that earlier in the session when all of a sudden we came up with $1.5 billion in new revenues that were unexpected.
Correct. Due to changes in the federal tax law and a growing economy that we did, the state did receive a 1.6 billion-ish windfall. 800 of that is we can carry that forward. That's due to record low unemployment across all categories, which helps everybody. So that's a positive. Now it's what we do with that where some of our concerns lie. There was discussion by the governor of a pension skip. Luckily, this windfall was able to ease those tensions for a year. We would like to see that carried forward, make sure that those pensions are being paid.
And that's all the time we have for this segment of Illinois Lawmakers. Representative Davis, Representative Wehrli, thanks so much for your time. We always appreciate your expertise on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Joining us now on Illinois Lawmakers, Assistant Senate Majority Leader David Koehler, a Peoria Democrat. He's alongside with Assistant House Republican Leader Tom Demmer of Dixon. I want to start off with some bipartisan cooperation on an issue that's important to both of you. In just the last few minutes here as we're talking, the Illinois House has passed a major overhaul on dealing with Medicaid MCOs. Could you go into what's at stake there?
Yeah, this bill was a result of bipartisan negotiations over the last couple of months. Senator Koehler and I were both part of that group that got together, all four caucuses, the governor's office, and the relevant departments, to talk about what we could do to reduce the backlog of pending applications for the state's Medicaid system, both for people who are just getting into the system for the first time and those who are trying to redetermine their eligibility. We've heard from quite a few providers over the years that sometimes those decisions could stretch out months and months while there's really no way for the state to be able to pay for those claims. So this bill added some oversight to Medicaid managed care organizations and also gave the departments the tools they need to reduce those backlogs and reduce some of the bureaucratic red tape that was part of the system.
So this was something that's that people on both sides of the aisle feel
absolutely.
is very important.
And one of the, I think the key discussions we had was in our very last meeting where we talked about that what we have to absolutely eliminate is just the mistakes that are made in the process. And so we've got kind of two areas where things were getting jammed up. One was just that the right box wasn't checked or the form wasn't signed. Well, those things need to be routine. We need to handle and dispose of those. And then there's policy issues, and those are very fair. I mean, there may be a different interpretation that has to be arbitrated. Let's concentrate on that and let all this other stuff get out of the way so that people can have the health care they need when they need it and providers can get paid when they need it.
And a lot of those folks being on Medicaid in the first place also have significant problems to begin with, much less having to get tied up in a lot of red tape.
Right. Yeah, this is a problem that existed solely at the state level, at the MCO level, and the provider level. So
another area where there was some bipartisan cooperation this week had to do with making some changes to the legalization of cannabis bill that has moved out of the Senate on a bipartisan basis, 38-17. It's now over in the House. There was a lot of hard work on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, there was, and I think that Senator Staines and Senator Hutchinson on our side of the aisle did just a tremendous job of taking the issues, and Representative Kelly Cassidy, and I know some others in the House. But there's a lot of issues, a lot of moving parts to that, and I think that by all that discussion and making the changes that were necessary, the bill became as good as it was going to get at this point. I mean, it's a perfect no, but it was a bipartisan bill in the Senate. I think it's almost generational because I see that more of the younger members of the legislature tend to. It's just not as big an issue as it is for some of the older folks. But its time has come, and let's do it, and let's do it well.
Has that issue ripened to the extent that it's going to get the same kind of attention in the House?
Well, there are certainly several House Republicans who have been involved in negotiations over the last couple of months. Representative David Welter has been at the table for quite a few meetings talking about some of the concerns folks on our side of the aisle had. The bill's just made its way over to the House now. I know people are going through it to understand what the most recent version made changes to. I think it's likely that there'll be bipartisan support for it in the House, but to what extent, we're not quite sure yet.
As we count down the hours to adjournment, we're actually talking on Thursday. Adjournment is midnight, technically on Friday. We're still waiting for the components to come together for a capital bill in the state, and that seems to be directly tied to the discussions that have been going on sports betting and casino gaming.
Well, there's kind of two issues there. One is, do you take and buy, create two different pools? I mean, you have horizontal and you have vertical.
Yes.
And so there's been some talk about, well, we know where the revenue is going to come from in terms of the roads and bridges, so let's just do that. That makes me a little bit nervous because in our communities we all have a lot of needs from vertical construction as well. So I'd just as soon we have it all together. Key to that is being able to find the resources to create revenue for the vertical construction. And I think that's where the gaming bill fits in.
Because horizontal projects, highway projects, largely can come from areas that we know are dedicated to that, like the motor fuels tax and so on and so forth. Vertical is a different situation.
It is a different situation. A couple years ago when voters approved the lockbox amendment that said transportation-related revenues have to be kept for transportation projects, made it maybe a little bit easier for us in some ways and maybe a little bit harder in some ways. But it's a sort of a closed loop. You're generating money from transportation, you're putting it back in there. When you get to the vertical side, and again, we're not just talking about new construction for vertical capital, but also maintenance on state facilities, deferred maintenance at universities, correctional facilities, IDOT, places like that. There are some really significant needs that have been deferred for many, many years. We need to find a way to pay for that. I think gaming expansion has always been a large component of that. There are a handful of other things that are on the table too. But I agree with Senator Koehler, being able to do both horizontal and vertical capital together, make sure that we're not focusing just on one of the areas that state infrastructure needs improvement and really trying to deal with everything in an even-handed way.
There was some discussion, I believe earlier in the week in the House Republican caucus of tying Republican votes on Capitol bill and all that back to the minimum wage issue, which passed out of here earlier in the year.
We tried to bring several ideas to the table. We've said that bipartisan negotiations work well when each side respects the other's priorities. We tried to talk about what some of those priorities for us were. Minimum wage was one of the items we talked about, but we've also been more focused on trying to make some things that would incentivize new investments and job creation throughout improving Illinois' business climate. So reinstating some tax credits, trying to extend incentives to get new development of data centers or other large construction projects. We think that's an important way to say we're not just going to have state-sponsored investment in infrastructure, but also spur some private investment in infrastructure as well.
That data center issue could be a big one because that's where a lot of people are investing now. It's a growth area for jobs.
Yeah, I think clearly we're turning the corner in terms of the outlook for Illinois. I think we've got a governor that really wants to do some very aggressive things to help build up our economy again. I think we've got actually very good relationships across the aisle, both in the House and the Senate. The Capitol bill will be a bipartisan bill, no doubt about that. So I think that we've set our sights on some things that are very doable and very important for the future of Illinois.
The last couple of budgets that have come out of the House and Senate have been bipartisan budgets for the most part. Representative Demmer, I know that you've been in on some of the working groups behind the scenes. How is that document coming together, or a series of bills coming together?
We don't have a proposal out there yet, but we've been, House Republicans have been involved in certain aspects of budget negotiations so far. We're continuing to work all the way up until the moment that a budget is presented to try to come to a bipartisan agreement on what our spending priorities for the next fiscal year are. We're not quite there yet, but I think there is a reason to believe that we may have some bipartisan support at the end of the day.
In terms of the Senate Democrats, I know that there's been a lot of concern about the hollowing out of social service programs, our safety net for people who are least able to help themselves. Is that a priority?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see in the budget when it is presented that a lot of those areas have had increases because of some of the devastation that has occurred in the last several years. What's important to recognize is that yes, the Democrats have supermajorities in the House and the Senate. As Democrats, we don't want to ever just be arrogant and think that we can go our way alone. If we don't reach across the aisle and try to have meaningful conversations and create bipartisanship where we can, then we've missed the point. Government needs to be run by both parties. You have loyal opposition, you have majority parties, but they've got to work together. And I think that's what you're seeing this year. Yes, we have differences. We're gonna expand upon those differences, but we also have areas where we cooperate and where we get along, and we're going to try to do things that really put Illinois in the forefront of where our interests are.
Now, one of the areas where you had some very serious disagreements was on the governor's idea of a progressive income tax for the state of Illinois. But over the next few months, there will be some study of property tax relief. Republicans will be in on those discussions as well.
Absolutely. Property taxes are a significant burden on Illinois families all across the state in both Republican and Democratic areas. We want to make sure that there's a discussion about how we can try to reduce some of the cost pressures on local governments and not just raise one tax and make a transfer to the other. We have to look at it really holistically.
Well, see, and that's a good point. Yes, there was disagreement on the progressive income tax, the fair tax. But there's agreement on what we have to do to bring property taxes down. So the Republicans aren't just going to take their ball and go home. We're going to engage in the conversation and move on to where we need to be. So that's the sign, I think, of healthy government.
There's still hope here at the Illinois State Capitol.
There still is.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Senator Koehler from Peoria, and Representative Tom Demmer from Dixon. Thanks so much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. That's it for this week's edition of the program. We will be back after adjournment with a wrap-up of what happened here at the Illinois State Capitol as the spring session reached its conclusion.